Students who've lost their temper on the teacher. What happened? Not that I was a teacher, but I worked as one of the school admins. I spent a year at a small Christian college. One of the girls there witnessed her father's suicide. She came home one day and found her dad in the backyard with a gun. He told her, "I love you, baby," and then shot himself. Obviously, she was deeply traumatized, so she sought help from the campus counselor. She was in shock and dealing with severe depression. Here's where it gets bad. The counselor violated patient-doctor confidentiality and told the dean everything. The dean then called her into his office. He told her that because it was a Christian school and depression was a sin, she was expelled. So, on top of losing her father, she lost her housing, her friends who were supporting her, and a significant amount of progress towards her degree. She was almost done with her third year. And this is why Christians sometimes get a bad rap. I'm no theology expert, but most religions preach patience, love, caring, and support. It's usually a pretty central theme, right? What happened to this girl was the complete opposite of that. So many people who claim to be Christians aren't behaving in a way that aligns with the values they supposedly hold dear. It's not about being perfect. No one, whether Christian, Muslim, or anything else, is going to follow their faith perfectly, but to cast someone out because they're hurting no matter what you believe is genuinely heartbreaking. I mean, where is the compassion? Story 2. This might not be the worst teacher story, but it's definitely the weirdest. Mr. Pro was a substitute teacher I had in high school back in the 90s at an inner-city school. He was an older black guy with a loud voice. There were a lot of disrespectful students who constantly talked back to the teachers, which made learning a real struggle. Mr. Pratt had a unique way of dealing with those kids. Imagine this well-dressed, yet clearly street-smart substitute teacher. When a student would act out, he'd pull out a puppet from his desk, a custom-made puppet that looked just like him, suit and all. He'd then start scolding the student through the puppet. The puppet was called Pratt Daddy. By the way, he'd make the students talk to the puppet and apologize. Most of them didn't. They just laughed and tried to talk over Pratt Daddy. If that happened, Pratt Daddy would kick them out of the class and lock the door. Then the puppet would go back into the desk drawer, and Mr. Pratt would go on teaching. It was so strange. Can you imagine acting out in class and the teacher pulls out a puppet and starts making fun of you in front of everyone? If you didn't back down, the puppet would throw you out. What an awkward situation. That's got to be really tough, and maybe a little traumatic, but also the kids were being rude to begin with. It's just a hilarious concept of discipline for a teacher to come up with. Story 3. Okay, so sophomore year of high school, I was in an advanced algebra class and I was struggling. The teacher would lecture for the first half of class and then give us the remaining time to work on our homework. Since I was having a hard time, I went to her desk a lot to ask for help on specific problems. She had this annoying habit of grabbing my notebook, completing the problem for me, and then saying, "Did that help?" I was usually polite and said, "Yeah," and went back to my desk. One day, I was confused again, so I brought my homework up and she just did the problem without explaining how she got the answer. I guess I rolled my eyes a little and she saw me. She snapped, saying if I didn't want her help, I shouldn't come to her. I just blurted out, "I came to you because I was confused about how to do these problems. You're just showing me a completed problem and aren't actually teaching me how to solve anything." Story 4. In high school math class, I was having trouble solving a problem on the whiteboard. I should have known how to do it, but my mind just went blank. My teacher started making fun of me, then she started laughing, then she started egging on the other students to make fun of me too. Can you believe that? I lost it. I flipped her desk over. As I was walking out, I punched a hole in the wall and then just left the school and drove home. Surprisingly, I didn't get in any trouble because a few of the other students went to the office after I left and told them what happened. The teacher lied and claimed that I just flipped out for no reason. I'm not the type of person to do that, so the teacher ended up getting suspended, and I got transferred to a science research class that they counted as a math class for me. Geez, talk about finding the mean values, get it? 'Cause the teacher was… Okay, never mind. Story 5. Back in 7th grade, I had a teacher who literally didn't care about anything except what I was doing. The dude absolutely hated me. One day, we were watching a movie, and I got called out for eating candy in class. I told him that I wasn't eating anything, that I was just playing with my pen. The guy tries to reach into my pockets to see if I had anything. I pushed him off because I was about to get felled up by this dude for no reason. He got in my face and started demanding that I empty my pockets, or he was going to call the administrators. I told him that he didn't have to do that because I was about to leave myself. But he wasn't having it and stayed in my face. I remember screaming, If you don't let me out of this class, I'm going to punch the absolute crap out of you. Long story short, he finally let me out, and I got a 10-day suspension for eating a closed fruit roll-up. That's insane. So, I have a couple of questions. One, was he actually eating candy and got called out, or did he lie about just playing with his pen because, it's fine to get in trouble, but a 10-day suspension for a fruit roll-up? If that was the case, that's egregious. And two, what is with the teacher Diggletron and cross the line? Like, I don't even know when this happened or how far back it occurred, but geez, how did this guy not get suspended? Did nobody speak up? Did nobody in the class say, yeah, freaking mister, whatever, started shoving his hands in Timothy's pants? That's crazy. Story 6. My freshman year in college, I had a mandatory writing class. I actually like writing, but the professor was terrible on the first day. She said that all she cared about was the finished project, not the method we used to get there. It was even written in her syllabus. About 2 weeks later, we had our first writing assignment. A 5-page paper on whatever topic we chose. The problem was that it was due in 3 weeks, and she wanted us to turn in 3 full 5-page rough drafts before then. So, my first submission was 3 paragraphs. She gave me an F. I told her that everyone in there was just BSing 5 pages and that she was a hypocrite. My second submission was just 2 words. Screw you. She gave me another F. So I went to the dean of students. I told him that I'd take the FS, but she couldn't lie and say the writing process was independent and then have a mandatory rough draft. He agreed with me, had the FS wiped, and had a meeting with the professor. I was informed that I didn't need to participate in the rough drafts for the rest of the semester, but I did turn in the third one. It said 2 words. I win. I got an A- in that class. Totally worth it. It's always wild hearing these stories about crazy teachers who are out of control and abuse their power, or whatever they do, or specifically pick on students, because I never got to experience that, and I even took a very similar class. I had advanced writing in college, and I passed it with flying colors. Not bragging because I wasn't that great, but the teacher would play country music, and as long as I knew the lyrics, she'd be like, "Oh, Tristan's my favorite. He knows all the worst of Zac Brown Band." So, the one teacher I had who wasn't by the books, all I had to do was do a little hootenanny, and I got an A+. Story 7. It might not sound like much of a temper tantrum, but generally, I was a quiet, respectful, and non-confrontational student. On this particular day in 10th grade history, the students were consistently losing their handouts and then badgering the teacher for extra copies. He was clearly at the end of his rope. I had never asked for extra handouts before. However, it seemed someone had mistakenly packed up my papers with theirs at the end of class. Since I couldn't find mine anywhere, I went to ask him for another copy. Doing so in a super meek and apologetic manner, I knew he wouldn't be thrilled, but I was a good kid who never caused trouble. So I naively assumed such a simple request wouldn't be a problem. I was dead wrong. I got a full-blown lecture, piercing, glares, yelling, the whole 9 yards, and ultimately, a flat-out refusal. I swear I must have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Given how drastically he overreacted, I stared at him as coldly as I could muster and said, in a calm voice laced with serious venom, "Thanks for nothing." Then I turned around and strode off. He shouted after me, sounding completely incredulous that I dared to speak to him that way. But I didn't turn around or stop. Dang, that felt good. Especially as a shy, 14-year-old girl. You know what? Good for her. It's not just about a child standing up for themselves against an adult authority figure. I think it always means more when it's a respectful, well-mannered, and polite kid finally pushing back. Hopefully, it gets through to the teacher and makes him reevaluate his behavior, like, "Oh, okay, she's usually non-confrontational, quiet, nice. She does everything right. Maybe I'm the problem." But then again, maybe we're asking too much of a guy who's already lashing out at students. Story 8. I was in the arduous process of preparing for interviews to get into Oxford. I was coming from a pretty deprived area of the country, and I was the sole applicant from my school, a school that had only sent 2 or 3 students to Oxbridge in the past 40 years. One afternoon per week was grudgingly dedicated to PSHC, personal, social, health, and citizenship education, which usually just involved watching outdated videos about road safety and other equally thrilling topics. Instead of watching the video, I was in the corner trying to teach myself further maths A-level. The school had cut the funding for the tutor we used to have, and no one else on staff was qualified to teach it. Obviously, I got into trouble for not watching the video and was sentenced to standing outside the classroom. The teacher came out to deliver a scolding, saying I should be setting a better example for the other students, so I said, "I can't believe you want me to watch a video on driving safely. When 1, I don't even drive. 2, I've seen this exact same video 3 times already. And 3, I'm working as hard as I can to get into Oxford. This crap is the reason the school never gets anyone into Oxbridge." It didn't get me out of trouble at the time, but I did eventually get into Oxford. Story 9. I had this English teacher in grade 11 who decided to single me out in front of the entire class. He announced that my short story for my ATER, Australian Tertiary Admission rank, exam was the worst he had seen in his entire 30-year teaching career. Without hesitation, I told him to shut up and not talk to me like that, especially about my friends. He got up and started ranting about how strange it was that I was both stupid and disrespectful. So, I stood up, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "At least I'm not into children." Then, I stormed out. This teacher had been accused earlier in the year of inappropriately touching students. Everyone knew he was guilty, but the principal didn't want the bad publicity, so nothing was done. Ugh, well, that's beyond gross. If that story is true, I sincerely hope that guy got fired and faced the consequences. Story 10. I was a senior in college, begrudgingly taking a chemistry class because, thanks to some last-minute changes, it had suddenly become required for my major. Keep in mind, I'm an engineering student, so I figured this freshman-level chem class was going to be a total joke. Well, the last problem on test 3 turned out to be mathematically ambiguous. I walked up to her during the test, pointed this out, and she just smugly told me, "You'll figure it out." Fast forward a couple of weeks. She marked me down 10 points for that problem, so I reviewed it with a few friends, then went to her office. I very calmly laid out my reasoning, presenting a quick proof demonstrating exactly why the problem was mathematically ambiguous. I was right. She admitted that I was right, but she flat out refused to give me the points back because that would mean admitting that she was wrong and that an undergraduate was right. She basically took the stance of, "I have a PhD, and you're just an undergrad, so tough luck." Much cursing and anger ensued, and ultimately, I was kicked out of her office. Story 11. The absolute worst teacher I ever had was my shop teacher/gym teacher in high school. He wouldn't do anything at all. I could literally smoke in shop class and even in gym class, as long as it was outside while we were running laps or something equally pathetic. I never once heard him mention safety measures when using shop equipment. Unsurprisingly, several people got hurt, and one kid actually lost half a thumb. But the absolute worst thing he did was hiring some of the grade 9 and grade 10 girls to babysit for him and his wife. He would leave his wife at the bar and go home under the pretense of checking on the kids, but he was eventually caught fooling around with a 15-year-old girl. After a police investigation, they found a ton of homemade explicit content on his laptop of him having relations with many young girls. Last I heard, he was sentenced to life in jail. This all happened in a town of less than 300 people. Oh God, I hate this story. This is so gross, so messed up, and so incredibly sad. Story 12. In my junior year of high school, I had an English teacher who had a reputation for being a real jerk. Toward the end of the semester, my mom unexpectedly passed away. I spent 3 grueling nights in the hospital with her before she died. The day before she passed, I was in English class when our teacher started firing off questions about the previous night's reading assignment. I obviously hadn't done the reading because I had spent the previous 2 nights in the ER. She called on me and I clearly didn't know the answer. I'll never forget the sinister smile that crept across her face when she said, "Looks like somebody didn't do their reading last night. Why didn't you do your homework?" At this point, I was trying my absolute hardest to keep it together and not start bawling in front of my friends and classmates. She mistook my silence for embarrassment about not doing my homework. She then placed both hands on my desk and sarcastically said, "Oh, what's wrong? Do you need a hug?" That's when I finally lost it. I stood up and, fighting through tears, managed to choke out, "I didn't do it because I was in the hospital with my dying mother. So go screw yourself, you stupid loser." I walked out and never went back to her class. Screw you, Mrs. Roses. Story 13. I didn't exactly lose my temper with a professor, but I'm pretty sure he was embarrassed. It was a small writing class, about 20 students, and 4 or 5 of them always sat in the back and gossiped the entire time. One day, I finally got angry enough to say something, so I raised my hand and said to our soft-spoken and meek professor, "Excuse me a moment." Then, I turned around and said sternly to those kids, "I don't know about you, but I'm paying to listen to him talk, not to listen to you. You don't have to be here. Leave if you can't shut up." Then, I turned back around, apologized to my surprised and sheepish professor for interrupting him, and made a show of paying attention while completely ignoring the snide remarks coming from behind me, calling me a turd. Sorry, Professor Matthews. To be fair, you should have done that a month ago. It worked though. I don't think this is bad at all. It sucks that the guy didn't control his classroom earlier, but if he was too afraid to take control himself, I think he probably very much appreciated you having the guts to do so. Story 14. When I was in kindergarten, my first teacher got pregnant, so she had to take maternity leave. She was replaced with a substitute teacher to teach my class for the rest of the school year. She was incredibly strict and not very nice at all. I had some issues with her, but I was generally a very good student, quiet and kept to myself. One day, I asked if I could use the bathroom, but she flat out refused to let me go. I really had to go and ended up peeing on myself. I remember going to the nurse, and then they called my mom. My mom went up to the school and had a meeting with the teacher, the principal, and someone else. 2 days later, that teacher was fired. Okay, what kind of freaking military school was this teacher trying to run in kindergarten? Hey, excuse me, I have to pee. No, you don't. Story 15. An English teacher I had in high school asked the class to spend half of the class period in the library finding a love poem. I chose Sonnet 130 by Shakespeare. It's not a standard love poem. It doesn't say anything nice about the lady until the very end. She failed me on the project. The very next project was to choose a poem that described our general feelings around that time. I chose a poem from the existentialists. I don't recall exactly which one, but it was about suicide. Again, I failed. The project, I'll never forget her response after I read it aloud. "Why would you choose something so awful and sad?" A girl in the class bravely spoke up and said, "Maybe that's how she feels." The teacher sent me to the principal's office for punishment. By the end of that year, I was in a mental hospital for attempted suicide. I was there for 3 months. Oh, that sucks. I hope this was a long time ago, not that it makes it any better, but at least I feel like today we're a lot more aware of depression and mental states, and we're more conscious of other people's feelings. So I hope this isn't happening still. Although I'm sure that it is, I don't know what I hope for, okay? I just hope everyone's okay, sue me. Story 16. In high school, I threw a book at my math teacher's head. She fell backward and slammed her head on the blackboard. No concussion, thankfully, but she was stunned enough that I had time to grab my stuff and bolt away while screaming obscenities at her back. The backstory is that my mother was and still is a loser and was sleeping with my math teacher's husband. Of course, the spurned woman took it upon herself to make me pay for it. She made my life a living hell, constantly abusing me and demeaning me in school. One day, I just snapped. What saved me from being expelled was that I didn't just storm out of school. Instead, I went straight to the principal's office and stated that either I was going to change class, or I would go around and tell everyone the real reason the teacher was treating me so badly. That would have been quite the scandal for the school, so I was indeed transferred. However, I was still treated like a pariah for the remainder of my year there. All the old teachers and staff knew I was getting beaten every freaking day and didn't do a single thing. May they rot feet first in a lousy third-class retirement home. Story 17. My old English teacher. This is quite a long story, so buckle up, kids. When I started at the school, I got put into Jason's class in year 10. I was 15 years old, nothing too out of the ordinary. He seemed alright at first, but I quickly realized that the bullying had followed me to this new school. 2, some rumors spread around the class that my thighs were covered in scars and that I used to self-harm. One day, everyone was just chatting in class, and Jason made a joke about self-harm. Pointedly glancing over at me, he said something along the lines of, "We all know who I'm talking about." I was so incredibly upset that I stopped attending English altogether until they moved me to a different class. At the start of this year, when I went into year 12, I was put into his English class again. I was absolutely furious. I threatened not to attend and was met with the equally reassuring threat that I wouldn't graduate if I didn't do English. So, I reluctantly decided to see how it went. A terrible idea. Within a few weeks, I decided I was going to drop out anyway, and Jason was as much of a loser as ever. One day in English class, a guy sat next to me and started to insult me. I calmly asked him to leave me alone, but he didn't after he kept at it. I stood up to move to a different seat. He followed me, telling me not to walk away from him, and then leaned down and grabbed me from behind. I don't like being touched, and he had his hands on my chest. I absolutely lost my crap. I pushed him off me and screamed at him not to freaking touch me. Jason then had the audacity to ask me not to swear in his classroom. I called him a useless piece of crap, grabbed my stuff, and left, and I never went back to English. I attended school for 3 more days, then never went back at all. Story 18. I had a French teacher in high school who was incredibly racist. I had heard about it from my older sister, but we all brushed off her concerns because she was generally dramatic about everything. He would tell racist jokes in class and then tell the kids not to tell anyone outside the class the joke because, it was funny, but they wouldn't get it. He would also give better grades to white kids who worked on the same project as non-white kids. Having had enough of it, I decided to withdraw from French. Feeling I already knew the language and didn't need to put up with this BS, I took a free block instead, where I worked in the library. Other French teachers tried to talk me out of withdrawing from the program, but he argued that I wasn't very good at French anyway, and that it was probably for the better. One day, one of my friends, who was a visible minority, came running into the library crying. I don't remember exactly what he had said to her, but it was something pretty culturally insensitive. I marched up to his classroom with her and called him out for his racism, telling him off in French. After that school year, he stopped teaching and returned to France. Let's go. Celebratory baguettes all around. Story 19. Okay, this one has multiple stories. English professor. This English professor made the entire class hunt down specific New York Times newspaper articles because she had once won an award for doing just that. Everyone in her class had to hunt down and cut up these New York Times articles to include in our little diary entries. If you were missing even 2 of the 35 entries, you got an F on the entire grade. It didn't matter if the other 33 entries were the best she had ever seen. Missing 2 meant failing the entire assignment, and this was college English too. Mind you, seriously? Computer science professor. This professor was the head of the computer science division at this college. I took an online course with him. After a long delay after the semester had already started, like 2 weeks after it should have started, he finally showed us the 2 different websites he had set up. One had all our hardware questions, and the other had all our software questions. We also had our college email app, which professors could use to announce new assignments or other important information to the class. Well, I worked through the entire class. It was super easy. He just kept announcing jokes to the class. Smartly, I took screenshots just in case and kept going through it all. Then I get my final grade. An F for apparently no reason. Well, instead of announcing a super important project that was worth over 30% of our grade through normal channels, he kept announcing jokes. I never had the ability to learn about this crucial project that I needed to do, and so I got an F in the class. Philosophy professor. This philosophy professor, who also happened to be the head of the philosophy division at the same school, wanted around 2 hours of work put into each essay for every hour of class time. Not too bad, but still annoying. Then snow days came, and he decided he wanted 4 hours of essay writing to make up for the snow days, which is illegal where I am. Then he decided he wanted to do the final exam early and demanded over 6 hours of essay writing per hour of class. This would be okay if it was my only class, but I had 4 other classes and I couldn't handle the workload. Also, both the midterm and final exams were oral exams. For no good reason, he graded you seemingly randomly on them. He had pop quizzes randomly, too. He'd just walk in and announce test. What is Socrates' art preference? And kick you out if you took out your notebook at all.